I came home early from work on a Tuesday afternoon and walked into my own bedroom and found my boyfriend in bed with my cousin. That's where this story starts. Right there. In my apartment in Nashville, Tennessee. My bed, my sheets, my home, with the lamp on my nightstand still glowing because neither of them had even bothered to turn it off. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old. And I need you to hold that image, really hold it, while I tell you everything that came before it and everything that came after. Because what I did next is the part that people can't stop talking about. So let me take you back. Growing up, my cousin Danielle and I were inseparable. Not just family close, genuinely, chose each other close, the kind only certain cousins are lucky enough to have. We grew up 20 minutes apart, showed up for each other at every school event, every bad breakup, every moment that mattered. She was the first person I called when something good happened before my mom, before any friend. Danielle was bold and funny and magnetic in a way I always quietly admired. The kind of woman who walked into a room and made it feel fuller just by being there. I loved her the way you love someone you didn't just inherit, someone you would have chosen regardless. And then there was Ryan. I met Ryan at a mutual friend's birthday party about 3 years before any of this happened. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He was the one you kept drifting toward without meaning to. We talked for almost 4 hours that night. I drove home replaying the whole conversation with a ridiculous smile on my face. Within 2 weeks, we were texting constantly. Within a month, we were official. Within 6 months, I knew, in that deep, certain, slightly embarrassing way you only really know once, that I wanted to marry this man. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to understand what was actually at stake. This wasn't casual. Ryan and I were 2 years in. I had started pointing at jewelry store windows. I had thought about what our wedding would look like. I had a whole future mapped out, clear and bright and completely real to me. I was happy. Genuinely, fully, dangerously happy. I know now that's exactly when you should start paying attention to the people closest to you. Because I wasn't paying attention at all. Now you have the image. Let me fill in what led up to it. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing about that day gave any hint of what was coming. That's the part that still gets me when I think about it. I'd had a long shift at the hospital where I worked as an administrator. The kind of shift where the hours blur and the coffee stops working, and you start counting down the minutes purely out of spite. My feet hurt. My head hurt. I was running on determination and a granola bar I'd eaten at my desk around 2 in the afternoon. Then my colleague Jess offered to cover the rest of my shift. She owed me a favor. I didn't hesitate for a second. I thanked her, grabbed my bag, and walked out into the late afternoon sun feeling like I'd won something small. The drive home felt like a gift. The roads through East Nashville were clear for once. My playlist shuffled onto a song I loved, and I turned it up and sang badly and thought about absolutely nothing important. I thought about dinner. I thought about whether Ryan might want to come over. I thought about how nice it would be to just sit on the couch and do nothing for a few hours. I parked. I walked to the door. I put my key in the lock. You already know what I found. But here's what I haven't told you yet. What it actually felt like to be standing in that doorway. I've replayed it so many times that the memory has this strange, overexposed quality now, like a photograph left in the sun too long. But it was real. Ryan was real. Danielle was real. The lamp on my nightstand was still on because neither of them had thought to turn it off. They both froze completely when they saw me. Danielle's face went a color I genuinely don't have a name for. Ryan looked like he was waiting for the ground to open up and take him. I stood there for what felt like a long time. And then something happened that surprised even me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the lamp or say anything particularly sharp or memorable. Something moved through me that was much quieter and much colder than any of that. I looked at both of them and said, very evenly, that I wanted them out of my apartment by the time I got back. Then I picked up my keys from the counter and walked out. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I didn't cry there either. I just sat completely still and stared at the steering wheel and tried to make sense of what I had seen with my own 2 eyes in my own bedroom in my own home. Eventually, I drove. I didn't plan a route. I just drove through Nashville until the streets felt unfamiliar, and then I turned around and drove back. They were gone when I got home. The bed had been remade badly, hastily, like someone doing it in a panic, and Ryan had left a note on the kitchen counter. He was sorry. He needed me to calm down. He wanted me to call him. I read it twice. Then I folded it up, put it in the kitchen drawer, and went to bed. I did not call him. The next morning I woke up and the first thing I felt was the strange, hollow quiet of a decision already made. I didn't call Ryan. I texted him. Short, clear, no room for interpretation. I told him I would pack up his things over the next few days and drop them off at Danielle's place, because that was where he lived now. I told him not to come by. I told him not to call. He called anyway, 3 times that morning. I watched my phone ring on the bathroom counter while I brushed my teeth, and I felt nothing in particular about it. I texted him once more and told him if he came to the door I wouldn't answer it. He stopped calling after that. Danielle called twice. I didn't watch those ring. I just turned my phone face down. It took me about a week to gather all of Ryan's things. I was methodical about it. I didn't rush. I didn't do it all in one angry session. I did a little each day, a shelf at a time, a drawer at a time. I washed everything before I packed it, which I've thought about since and realized was a strange thing to do, but at the time it felt important. I didn't want to hand him anything that still smelled like my home. Every time I knocked on Danielle's door to drop off a bag, one of them would try to say something. Ryan tried twice, once asking if we could talk, once just saying my name in a voice that was clearly meant to make me stop walking. Danielle tried once, stepping outside and reaching for my arm, her eyes already red like she'd been crying. I didn't stop walking. I handed over whatever I'd brought and I left, every single time. Here's the thing about that silence that I don't think people understand unless they've been there. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even strength, not really. It was self-preservation. Because I knew with absolute certainty that if I opened my mouth and let any of it out, I would fall apart in front of them. And I was not going to give either of them that. So I said nothing. And I kept saying nothing. 3 years passed. I went completely no contact. I blocked both of their numbers eventually. I stopped going to family events where I knew they might appear. I pulled back from the wider family altogether, which wasn't as hard as it sounds, because I'd already been drifting from them for years. I'd learned a long time ago that my family wasn't the kind you could lean on in a crisis. They were the kind who smoothed things over and changed the subject and made you feel like your pain was an inconvenience to the room. So I didn't tell any of them what had happened. Not my mother, not my aunts, not any of the cousins or family friends who vaguely knew I'd been dating someone and then suddenly wasn't anymore. I just let it become one of those things that went unspoken, filed away in the part of family history nobody asks about directly. I went to therapy. I rebuilt slowly. I had good months and bad months and a few months that were genuinely terrible in ways I still don't talk about much. My mental health took a real hit, not just from the betrayal itself, but from carrying it completely alone. From having no one in my corner who even knew the full story. But I got through it. Not neatly, not quickly, but I got through it. And then 3 years after the worst day of my life, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I picked up because I was expecting a call from my landlord about a maintenance issue. I said hello in the distracted, half-present way you answer calls from numbers you don't know, already half expecting a spam pitch or a wrong number. It was Danielle. I recognized her voice immediately, even after 3 years. It hadn't changed. She sounded bright and warm and completely, bewilderingly at ease, like she was calling an old friend she hadn't caught up with in a while, not someone she had helped destroy. She sounded happy. That's the thing that hit me first and hardest. Not guilt, not hesitation. Happy. She said she had some exciting news. She said she'd been meaning to reach out for a while. She said she hoped I was doing well. And then she told me that she and Ryan were getting married. I remember a very specific stillness settling over me when she said those words. Like everything in my apartment went quiet at once. She kept talking. She talked about the venue and the date and how long they'd been planning it. She talked about how much it would mean to have family there. She talked about how she knew things between us had been complicated. Complicated, she said, like what happened was a minor disagreement, like it was something a little time had simply smoothed over, but that she really hoped we could move past all of that because this was such an important day. And then she asked me to be her maid of honor. There was a moment, just a moment, where I genuinely couldn't tell if I had misheard her. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen like it might offer some kind of explanation. She asked again. She said she knew it was a big ask. She said there was no one else she'd rather have standing beside her. She said the word sister, and I felt something sharp and hot move through me that had nothing to do with sentimentality. I lost it. I don't remember everything I said, which is probably for the best. I remember it was loud. I remember I used words I don't typically use. I remember telling her exactly what kind of person I thought she was, and exactly what she had done, and exactly how I had felt about it for the last 3 years, while she had apparently been busy planning a wedding and picking out venues, and having the kind of life you get to have when you take what belongs to someone else. I hung up. About 10 minutes later, a text came through from her number. She said she understood I was upset. She said the offer still stood. She said if I didn't want to be maid of honor, she simply wouldn't have one. I put my phone down on the couch and sat on the floor next to it and stared at the ceiling for a long time. And somewhere in the middle of all of that anger and hurt and disbelief, a very small, very quiet idea began to take shape. I sat with it for 3 days before I did anything. I needed to think it through properly. Not react, think. Because there's a difference between doing something out of raw anger and doing something with intention, and I wanted this to be the latter. I wanted to be clear-headed. I wanted to be certain. Here is what I knew. They had taken something from me that I could never get back. 2 years of my life. A future I had genuinely believed in. Years of friendship and trust with someone I had considered as close as a sister. My mental health. My sense of safety in my own relationships. There is no apology that covers all of that. There is no flower arrangement and venue choice and invitation in the mail that cancels any of it out. And here they were, inviting me to watch them celebrate it. The audacity of that invitation had kept me up 2 nights in a row. But somewhere around the 3rd night, I stopped being kept awake by the anger and started being kept awake by the idea. What if I said yes? Not out of forgiveness. Not out of wanting to heal or move forward or any of the things she'd suggested in that text message, but because a maid of honor gets a microphone. A maid of honor stands up in front of everyone, every family member, every friend, every person who had no idea what these two had actually done, and gives a speech. And I had 3 years' worth of things to say. I texted Danielle back on the 4th day. I apologized. I told her I'd had time to think and that my initial reaction had come from a place of old hurt that I clearly hadn't fully dealt with. I told her that maybe this was exactly the kind of moment that could help the 3 of us finally move forward. I wrote it carefully, warm enough to be convincing, vague enough to be deniable. I read it back twice before I sent it. Danielle replied within 4 minutes. She was overjoyed. She used the word thrilled. She said she'd cover the dress and the travel and anything else I needed. She said she had always believed in us. I accepted without hesitation. I also accepted knowing that I would not be spending a single dollar of my own money on this wedding. That week, I started writing. I sat down every evening after work with a blank document open on my laptop, and I wrote. Not carefully at first. At first, I just let it all out, every raw and ugly thing I had packed away over 3 years. The nights I couldn't sleep, the therapy sessions, the way I had flinched the first time I tried to date someone new because I couldn't stop waiting for something to go wrong. The ring I had never stopped thinking about, the future I had dismantled piece by piece and tried to rebuild into something different. Then I started shaping it. I took all of that feeling and I turned it into something that could be read out loud. Something that would be clear. Something that every single person in that room would be able to follow without needing any context, because I was going to give them the context myself. By the end of the week, I had a speech, and it was the most honest thing I had ever written. All I had to do now was get to the wedding. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before my alarm. I lay in bed for a while and took stock of how I felt. I was expecting the anger to be high, a kind of sharp, electric energy that would need to be managed. Instead, what I found was something closer to calm. A deep, settled quiet that I recognized from the morning, after I had packed his last bag and knocked on their door for the final time. The quiet of someone who has already made their decision and is simply waiting to see it through. I got dressed carefully. Danielle had covered the dress, a pale blue thing that fit well and would photograph nicely, and I wore it exactly as I was supposed to. I did my hair. I put on earrings. I looked, I think, like exactly what I was supposed to look like, a maid of honor ready to honor the bride. The venue was genuinely beautiful. I'll give them that without hesitation, because it's true and because the beauty of it actually made the whole thing land harder somehow. It was the kind of place you saved up for. High ceilings, warm light, tables dressed in white with flowers I didn't know the name of. A string quartet playing something soft near the entrance. It looked like every wedding board I'd ever scrolled past on the internet and silently imagined for myself. Our entire family was there. I saw faces I hadn't seen in 3 years, aunts, cousins, family friends who smiled at me warmly and said how good it was that I'd come, how lovely that we were all here together. His family filled the other side of the room, most of whom I'd never met. Everyone looked hopeful and well-dressed and completely unaware. Danielle looked beautiful, I'll say that too. She always had. She was in a dress that suited her perfectly, and she was glowing in the way brides are supposed to glow. And when she saw me across the room, her face broke into a smile that looked almost like relief. He was less composed. When Ryan's eyes met mine briefly across the room, I watched something flicker in his expression, something that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite fear, but lived somewhere in the territory between the two. He looked away first. I didn't. The ceremony itself went smoothly. I stood where I was meant to stand. I held what I was meant to hold. I smiled when people looked at me. The vows were exchanged, and there were tears and applause, and the whole room leaned into the warmth of it. And then the reception began, and I felt my heart rate start to climb. Not with panic, with something closer to readiness. Like the moment before you step onto a stage. I had my phone in my hand, the document open, the speech right there. I had read it so many times I almost knew it by memory. Almost. I still needed the words in front of me because I knew my voice was going to be a problem. I knew the emotion would come whether I wanted it to or not. I had told Danielle earlier in the day that I was planning to keep the speech short and heartfelt. She had squeezed my hand and told me that was perfect. When the MC announced the Maid of Honor speech, I stood up. The room turned to look at me. Glasses were raised. People leaned back in their chairs and smiled the comfortable smiles of people expecting something warm and forgettable. I looked down at my phone. I looked up at the room, and I began. My voice shook on the first sentence. I want to be honest about that because I think people imagine these moments going a certain way, composed and devastating, perfectly delivered. It wasn't like that. My voice shook and I tripped over a word, and for about 3 seconds I genuinely wasn't sure I was going to be able to get through it. But I kept going. Hello, everyone. I'm not very good at public speaking, so apologies in advance. A light laugh from the room, a few sympathetic smiles, They were still warm. They were still with me. It's an honor to be here at this wedding, and it's an even greater honor to be the maid of honor. I paused there, took a breath. Honestly, I was shocked I was even invited at all, because the last time I spoke to either the bride or the groom was when I walked into my own bedroom and found them together in my bed. The room changed. I felt it before I saw it, like a pressure shift, the way the air changes before a storm. The smiles didn't disappear all at once. They sort of froze. Glasses stopped halfway to mouths. Someone near the back made a sound that was quickly swallowed. I kept reading. Ryan was my partner at the time, you see. We had been together for 2 years. But I don't think Ryan got the memo that when you're in a relationship, you don't sleep with your partner's cousin. In your partner's bed. And it's not like Danielle didn't know we were together. She's my cousin. She had been there for the beginning of our relationship. She had met him through me. So who knows how long this was happening behind my back. Weeks, maybe. Months, possibly. I genuinely don't know, and I've had 3 years to wonder. I looked up briefly. Ryan was staring at the tablecloth. Danielle was very still in a way that didn't look like composure. It looked like shock. Around them, the room was utterly silent. Not politely quiet. Silent. I looked back down. For those of you who weren't aware of any of this, and I suspect that's most of you, we had been together for 2 years. I loved him with everything I had. I was dropping hints about rings. I was building a future. And I spent the 3 years after finding them together trying to put myself back together piece by piece, mostly alone, because I didn't feel like I could trust anyone around me with what had happened. My voice broke on that last sentence. Just slightly. I paused and breathed through it and kept going. Maybe if either of these two people had an ounce of loyalty between them, someone else would be standing up here right now. And I wouldn't have spent the last 3 years in therapy trying to figure out how to trust people again. I took a final breath. I've heard that 50% of marriages end in divorce. I genuinely hope yours is a messy one. From the bottom of my heart, you both ruined my life, and I will never forgive either of you. I lowered my phone. The room was absolutely silent. Not a gasp, not a murmur, not a single glass being set down. Just silence, the particular, heavy silence of a room full of people processing something they weren't prepared for and don't yet know how to respond to. I picked up my bag from under the chair, straightened my dress, and walked out. The drive home was the quietest I can remember. I had half expected to feel something dramatic the moment I walked out of that venue, some cinematic wave of relief or triumph or release. What I actually felt was exhausted. The deep, hollow exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down. My phone started going off before I even got to the car. I turned it face down on the passenger seat and drove. By the time I got home, I had missed 11 calls. My mother was among them. She called twice more while I was taking my shoes off in the hallway, and on the third attempt I picked up. She was furious. Not quietly disappointed, genuinely, loudly furious. She told me I had humiliated the family. She told me both Ryan and Danielle were devastated. She asked me repeatedly how I could do something like that at a wedding, at a family event, in front of everyone. She said the word embarrassment more than once. I told her they had earned every word of it. I told her that everything I said in that speech was true. Not a single sentence was exaggerated, not a single detail invented. I told her that if she wanted to be angry at someone for what happened at that wedding, she might want to start by asking Danielle and Ryan why they thought it was appropriate to invite the person they had betrayed to stand up and speak on their behalf. She kept defending them. She kept steering the conversation back to the scene I had caused rather than the reason I had caused to make one. And I realized, not for the first time, that this was exactly why I had never told any of them the truth 3 years ago. Because this, being told that my pain was the problem, that my reaction was the issue, that somehow I, the one who came home and found them in my own bed, was the one who owed everyone an apology. This is exactly what I had known would happen. I told her I loved her, and then I hung up. Over the following days, the messages came in waves. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Friends of the family who felt strongly enough about the situation to find my number and weigh in on it. Most of them were angry. Some were confused. A few were surprisingly gentle, people saying they didn't know what to make of it all but that they were there if I wanted to talk. And then there were the other messages, the ones that surprised me. A handful of people who had been in that room, some family, some his, reached out to say they understood, to say they were sorry for what had been done to me, to say they had sat there in the silence after I walked out and felt something they were still trying to name. One message came from someone I barely knew who said simply, "You were brave." I've read that message probably 15 times since. Do I feel better? I've thought about that question a lot in the time since. The honest answer is, I'm not entirely sure. The wound is old and deep, and a single afternoon doesn't close it. I still carry the years. I still carry the therapy sessions and the sleepless nights and the version of myself that had to be slowly, painfully rebuilt after believing in the wrong people. But there is something I feel that I didn't feel before. Something that took 3 years of silence and one afternoon of finally saying it out loud. A kind of settling. Like a door that had been left open for too long was finally, properly closed. They made their choices. Both of them knowingly, repeatedly, and without regard for what it cost me. I made mine, and I have zero regrets.